Hello and welcome once again to the Backfield Running Back Analysis Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. And through the first 4 weeks, we've seen some disappointments, some surprises, things like that. But one thing that's not been a surprise, and he's kind of proven this every time he's been on the field, Le'Veon Bell has a ridiculously high floor. He's got a huge ceiling as well. And $9,000 on FanDuel is pricey. $85 on DraftKings is as well. Obviously, you're going to have to pay a pretty penny for him, but it's hard to imagine any player really at any position that you can rely on more week in and week out than Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, and he has a great matchup here as well at San Diego, who ranks 29th against the run this season, 31st in yards per carry allowed. So you have to like that. There was a little bit concern with Ben Roethlisberger out that his production might dip a little bit. Defenses might be able to key on him. As we saw last Thursday night against the Ravens, none of that really mattered. He had over 150 total yards, went for a touchdown, caught 7 passes, just looked really good. And it really looked like the Steelers were finding ways to get him the ball in space. And he's just a patient runner that he can find his own way. He can create his own holes, basically. So some of that, having Roethlisberger out, is a little bit of a concern, but I don't think it's enough of one to steer me away from Bell in this nice matchup. So I'm going to have plenty of him on FanDuel, maybe a little bit less on DraftKings. We'll get to more of that later. There's some other cheaper guys that I like there, but on FanDuel, I think he's my RB1.
Yeah, and which makes a lot of sense. And like I said, even with Roethlisberger out, with Michael Vick in there, if anything, it could even just increase his workload because it's tougher to get guys like Antonio Brown involved. Right below him, Jamal Charles, the only other 9K plus running back on the week. And as we've seen over the past couple weeks, Jamal Charles and even Jeremy Maclin both been huge parts of that offense. I mean, it seems like once every 2 plays, you see Charles just sneak out of the backfield, catch a pass, and hasn't been finding the end zone as much as we'd like. I mean, did catch 3 touchdowns 2 weeks ago. But Charles, just similar to Le'Veon Bell, is such an integral part of this offense that he's got such a high floor. He also makes for a really, really nice safe play.
Yeah, they're basically 1A and 1B in this slate, so I'm going to have exposure to both of them. And I think the way to go about it is to have Bell on FanDuel where he's $100 cheaper than Charles, and then in turn, Charles is $700 cheaper than Bell on DraftKings. So I'm going to have Charles on DraftKings, Bell on FanDuel. That's probably the way I'm going to go with it. I mean, both of them have really good matchups. Chicago, the matchup for Charles, they rank 24th in run defense. Kansas City checks in as 9-point favorites, home favorites, that is, with a reasonably high team total at 27. So it all really kind of lines up for him. And, just like we said with Bell, catching passes out of the backfield, getting the ball in space, that's what he does. So I think he's a top flight back this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Hard to argue that. Next up, a value play, Dion Lewis for the Patriots. Obviously, as you mentioned here, coming off a bye week, they have an enormous team total, as they always do. And we saw LeGarrette Blount before, like you mentioned here, where, it was a game that was a 30-point game. He's the guy that kind of just runs out the clock. He's impossible to tackle. Not a speed guy, but Dion Lewis has been involved in the passing game and, the running game as well. And he's looked good in all facets. And obviously a guy that's stuck around and gotten the kind of looks that he has with the Patriots, it's got to be encouraging because it's been a while since we've seen any one back just consistently get a nice workload.
Yeah, and you have to consider LeGarrette Blount really didn't see any action until, about halfway through the third quarter in that last game, when it was well in hand and the Patriots were starting to push 40 points on Jacksonville. So other than that, it's been Dion Lewis full go for the Patriots, and that's kind of what I'm expecting here at Dallas this week. Granted, New England checks in as 9-point favorites here, but I don't think this is going to be a runaway game necessarily, even though Dallas is missing a lot of offensive starters. So, Dallas has allowed they actually rank 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Granted, some of that's inflated by Devontae Freeman doing his thing, that 3 touchdowns over them a couple of weeks ago. But, it just shows that there is susceptibility, and this New England offense kind of mirrors that of Atlanta, where they can just, throw it to Gronk, throw it to Edelman, get in the red zone, bam, draw play right up the middle. Not to pull a boomer on you with the the sound effects. But yeah, Dion Lewis right up the middle or a swing pass, get a couple touchdowns that way. So I really like him as an RB2 on FanDuel. And only 4,800 on DraftKings. Love that price point, especially considering he could have 5 receptions out of the backfield, give you a nice little boost there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then your next guy has been the highest scorer in DFS for 2 straight weeks, Devontae Freeman for the Falcons. And we have seen that Tevin Coleman is supposed to practice the rest of this week. Maybe he's questionable to play, but I mean, the way that this guy's playing, I can't imagine seeing more than a few snaps for Tevin Coleman, even if he does suit up in this one. And Devontae Freeman, I mean, I just don't fathom a scenario where he doesn't still get a huge workload. And, I think that might keep his ownership down a little bit lower than it rightfully should be. So I think he still makes for a really nice value play considering all the touches he's been getting.
Yeah, I really like him, but I'm just I'm struggling on how to approach this moving forward because his price is slightly going up. I still don't think it's high enough considering his production over the past 2 weeks. But the matchup on paper against Washington isn't the greatest. They rank second in run defense this season. Granted, it's a smaller sample size, but they are doing things right up front. And just the way that Washington defense is set up, a lot of teams seem to be attacking them through the air and not necessarily on the ground. But this Atlanta offense is just aligned so differently that Freeman doesn't have to get a ton of yardage. He doesn't have to break off big runs to score fantasy points, as he's proven over the past 2 weeks. So he's just the beneficiary of Matt Ryan and Julio Jones having an awesome connection, being the best QB wide receiver tandem in the league right now. So he's a beneficiary of that with the red zone scoring attempts. Say that 5 times fast. And yeah, I don't expect that to really drop off too much this week with Atlanta checking in at a 30-point team total.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. Justin Forsett next up, a guy who finally had kind of his breakout game. Didn't find the end zone, but had 150 yards and 27 carries, like you mentioned here at Pittsburgh. And 7,200 on FanDuel and 58 on DraftKings. This is a guy that's still going to see a big workload. And this is a Browns team that throughout the past couple seasons has been one of the worst, if not the worst, run defense in all of football. And, especially with Steve Smith out now, you got Crockett Gilmore banged up. I'm not sure if he's going to play or not. So they're just going to be relying once again on their lead back, and I don't see a scenario where the Browns really stop him here.
Yeah, the only concern you really have here that makes this a GPP play is the lack of goal line carries for Forsett, or the lack of usage all around in the red zone for Forsett. So otherwise, the matchup looks great. The game flow, Baltimore's favored by 6.5 at home. Browns offense, I don't know how capable they are of, kind of sneaking up on the Ravens and grabbing an early lead. So all those things really line up well, and I think he's a sneaky play. His price might be a little too rich for a lot of people, considering that there are cheaper options out there like Dion Lewis and people like that. So that's where the ownership opportunity comes in, the kind of the game theory approach to this. And you can kind of click Forsett in there and hope that maybe he breaks 1 or 2, which is very possible against this Cleveland defense.
Yeah, absolutely. The matchup's really not going to ever get any better than this one. TJ Yeldon next up for the Jags, and he's a guy who's, he's a middling price tag, pretty cheap actually on FanDuel, 66, 44 on DraftKings, and you mentioned here that it's a great matchup, and I mean, he looked good in yards per carry last week. So, I mean, I guess the question with this one is, how successful can Jacksonville be? And this is a fine matchup. So, I mean, if game flow dictates it, we could end up seeing, TJ Yeldon running out the clock here. And, I mean, he got plenty of touches last week.
Yeah, and Tampa Bay's defense has been pretty bad against the run all year. They rank 30th in total defense, rushing defense, that is. And so Yeldon, I mean, he's, has a lot of confidence coming into this matchup. Averaged over 5 yards per carry last week at Indianapolis. And this is expected to be a close game. 3-point favorite are the Bucs at home checking in. And I don't know. I think Jacksonville, they've kind of smartened up where they're leaning on the running game more and more, especially as Yeldon continues to produce. And that kind of keeps them in ball games, as we've seen over the past few weeks, or 2 of the past 3 weeks, I should say. And I think they're going to keep doing that. Just keep pounding Yeldon, giving him 20, 25 plus carries. And with a good matchup, he could eclipse the 100-yard mark again and maybe get into the end zone.
Yeah, absolutely. So a good spot for him there. Next up, Doug Martin, a guy who struggled the first couple weeks. A lot of that was game flow as well. I mean, we saw Tampa Bay get blown out first week especially. And not much of a pass catcher, but encouraging signs for people in PPR that he caught 5 passes last week. And he's pretty cheap still, and facing off against a Jags team that, has actually been pretty good against the run this year. But, I mean, if you get volume against, a defense like this, then it's certainly possible if this game stays close that he could end up, maybe not quite a similar performance, but definitely pay off that salary, though.
Yeah, and that's really where the risk reward comes in here. I think a lot of people like to shy away from that because Tampa Bay, as I said in this article, they're pretty much going with a hot hand approach when it comes to running back because they have 3 guys they could realistically feed down the stretch. So last week that was Martin, and he paid it off. This week it could be again. We aren't really sure, but game flow dictates that one of the Tampa Bay running backs could have a pretty solid game here. So taking a chance with Martin really wouldn't be such a bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Final guy was the overtime hero, CJ Spiller for the Saints. 55 on FanDuel, 38 on DraftKings. And like you mentioned here, with the full point PPR, it makes more sense to use him as a DraftKings play. And this is a guy that, is supposed to fill in the role that has been voided by Darren Sproles for a couple years now. And, hadn't quite taken on that role, but got to be encouraged by the fact that, granted, no one covered him on that 80-yard touchdown play. But at the same time, the guy could take it to the house at any time. Really, the only concern you have is workload because there's plenty of other backs there. And, the fact that he's injury prone, but you're certainly not worried about the injuries in an individual matchup.
Yeah, just something I'm looking at here is that Philadelphia is pretty good against the run this season. Normally, that would kind of stifle CJ Spiller being a running back, his projections. But, you have to consider he's not really your typical running back. He's basically a hybrid wide receiver. So the way that New Orleans is going to move the ball is going to be through the passing games. And I'm guessing that swinging it out to CJ Spiller, like extended handoffs, is the way they're going to go about that. So I'm more, looking at the fact that he's playing more snaps in every game since his return. He caught 5 passes last week. Granted, most of his production came off of one play, but, it's nice to have that upside in your back pocket too. So this is more of a DraftKings only recommendation for 3,800 over there. I really wouldn't go his way even in tournaments on FanDuel, but for 3,800 on DraftKings, he creates a lot of space, and if he does have that one big play, then you're sitting pretty with able to grab some of those other high price studs in your lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. So he certainly opens up a lot of things for you there in that flex spot, like you said. And that's going to wrap things up for this week. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Got lots of other great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.